I grew up in Paris, Missouri. It's just a really small town, lots of farms. Everybody kind of knows everybody. It's just a very small, rural community.
In the summer of 1994, 22-year-old Melanie Shepard is leading a hectic life, leaving her little time for romance.
I was going to school at College of the Ozarks. I was studying education. I wanted to be an English teacher. I was just really busy going to school and working. I was a cashier at a convenience store. I really didn't date that much.
Everything changes when a 28-year-old mechanic walks into the store one night. His name is James Addy.
There was a long line of people, and he was trying to check out, and he kind of yelled up to the front of the line, "Will you hurry up?" And I just kind of gave it right back to him. I said, "I'm doing the best I can." And he said, "Well, I'm cooking barbecue at my house." And I said, "I don't get any, I don't care." So later that night, he brought me some barbecue. And that's kind of how we met. I thought it was very sweet that he would go out of his way to do that for me. It was very nice. On a busy night, it was a nice surprise.
James returns to the store a week later, and this time, he's not buying groceries.
He asked me to come over, and that was our first date. He cooked supper for me. The food was good, and he's feeding me a lot. So that was kind of fun. We got to know each other pretty well, pretty fast. We both really liked each other. He just seemed like the kind of person that could take care of me and take care of himself and take care of a family. He seemed like husband material. Just a total package, you know?
Not long after they start dating, James drops a bombshell.
He shares with her that he's been married 3 times. So that's kind of shocking for Melanie. 3 times by 28, that's a lot.
He said they were cheaters. They were unfaithful and not good people. They were just gold diggers and trying to take advantage of him and of his good nature and his goodwill.
Despite this awkward beginning, 6 months into the relationship, things are getting serious, and James pops the question.
They were sitting on the couch talking, and he just sort of blurted out, "Will you marry me?"
I said, yes, of course. At that age, you want fairy tales and romance and happy endings. It was fun going to pick out a ring and being engaged. Felt like a grown-up. I felt very confident that I was with a good person. I was with the right person, and he wanted the same things that I did.
In the spring of 1995, James and Melanie get married. The newlyweds seem destined for a happy family life and soon welcome 2 kids.
Just had our perfect little family, 1 boy and 1 girl. I am a nurturing person, and I want to take care of my kids, and I want to take care of my husband, and I want to take care of my house. I think he saw that, yeah, that would work. That would work for him. That would work as a wife and good partner in life. I think that's what he wanted. He was a strong person. He was the protector and very capable of handling life. He was definitely the leader of the family. He took care of business.
In 2004, James takes on a higher-paying job as a prison guard, 30 miles away at the Moberly Correctional Center.
He really liked his job. He really did well in his job. He had no problem telling people what to do or being that aggressive person if he had to be. He could keep people in line. I think it was a real ego boost for him to have people listen to him and jump when he said jump. And then he expected it to happen at home, too. He wanted to have someone just follow along with whatever he said. It was tough because I'm not a prisoner. He didn't like that I had my own opinions, and he would get upset.
After 8 years of marriage and with her children now in school, Melanie looks to pursue her teaching career. But James puts his foot down.
He didn't want me to work. He didn't want me to go back to school. He kept saying, oh no, you need to stay at home. You need to stay at home. He just didn't want me out in the world and, come home and talk about my coworkers and talk about my job. He didn't want that. He wanted me to be focused solely on him. And he got very upset with me. He said I don't support him, and it was a big problem. It was a huge fight. That was very unexpected. I thought we were a team. I thought, we were building this life together, and I was supposed to just leave everything behind and just be his wife now. I didn't like that.
The arguments only get worse. For someone who craves control, James starts losing it.
He could get so mad that he would be threatening and intimidating and throw things. I can remember going through a lot of salt and pepper shakers. I would always just stand there because I don't want to be intimidated. I don't like that feeling. I don't like backing down from that.
11 years into the marriage and desperate for a sense of independence, Melanie finally defies James.
I started working. I was a substitute teacher, which was perfect while the kids were in school. It felt like this is where I should be. This is what I wanted to do. And it was nice to get out. I always said I liked being a stay-at-home mom, but I liked when it ended too. I liked a new thing to do.
For James, I think it was probably very scary. She has priorities and parts of her life that don't center around him anymore. I think at this point in time, James realizes that maybe Melanie is not going to be the submissive wife that he wants.
6 years into his job at the prison, James's work has strangely become all-consuming, and he disappears for longer lengths of time.
He would leave about 5:30 in the morning. It only takes 45 minutes to get there. So he left pretty early. And then he wouldn't get home till about 5 at night. That's 2 hours after his shift ended. I would just question him, why are you always so late? And he was angry with me. He's like, why can't you leave me alone? He would just say, well, I stopped and talked to people, or I went to get gas. Sometimes he'd have to wait on a train to go by. He had all these little excuses. So it was just odd.
There's a reason James is spending longer hours away from home, and it has nothing to do with work. He's spending more and more time with one of the other guards. Her name is Molly Watson.
Molly wanted to get a job that could make pretty good money that she could save back for her and her son, so she could go back to school. And so she started out at the Moberly prison. Her ultimate goal was to be a psychologist.
Molly needs the money, as she's a single mom, raising her son on her own.
Molly was a really good mom. She gave him all the love in the world.
I am very much a huge geek. I hate being called a nerd.
I wanted Molly to find somebody that respected her for her, that treated her like she deserved to be treated,
In 2011, just a year into her new job, Molly has started dating someone new, and she's excited to introduce him to her brother.
When I first met him, I just kind of looked at him and I was like, hi, I'm Tim. And he's just like, yeah, I'm James. And he put his head down. Just something about him. I didn't like him from the get-go. He was very standoffish. He would never look you in the eye to talk to you. He didn't really seem to care.
James's off-putting demeanor likely raised questions as to who he was, what were his intentions, and really, what was he hiding?
Just something was off about him. I knew there's something not right about this guy.
In 2011, Melanie and James Addy have been married for 16 years. Across town, Molly Watson has fallen hard for the same James Addy.
She adored him. She doted on him. She loved him unconditionally. She made James her #1 priority, and that's what James was looking for. He wanted somebody who put him first, always.
Molly's family is less than impressed with this new man in her life, who's 16 years her senior.
Molly told me he was in the process of getting a divorce, for 6 years, that he had like 2 kids.
He says that he's trying to be there for his kids and do what's best for them, so he's still living with his estranged wife.
I thought that was weird, I've been divorced and I wouldn't live with my ex-wife.
James visits Molly almost every day after work at her parents' house. They spend all their time together in her bedroom.
Molly is living at home with her parents. She's very close with her family. He's not making any attempts to really build a relationship with them. And so it just seems like there's secrets and there's something that's just not right.
He would try to keep her away from everybody. James would try to separate Molly from her son. You could always tell that he did not want Molly's son in their life at all. My dad didn't like him. My mom flat out told me, I don't like the guy. And it killed me to watch my sister keep dating him because, I knew she could do better.
Molly is so enamored with James, she brushes her family's concerns aside.
She was in love. Love is blind, and in her case, that's the truth. You could point out things to her that were obvious, and she would deny it.
In 2016, 5 years into their relationship, Molly and James take their first trip together.
He received a phone call from one of his friends. He got off the phone and I said, "What was that about?" And he said, "Oh, he wants me to go to Mexico with him."
Melanie encourages him to go with his coworkers and have a good time. In reality, James wasn't going with coworkers. He was going to Mexico with Molly, his secret girlfriend. For Molly, this was amazing. She wanted to go on a vacation with James so badly. She was madly in love with him, and this was just an opportunity for them to grow their relationship and spend more time together.
It looked like when they started to go on vacation that they were more committed to each other. Like he was maybe getting serious about it. We've had the doubts about him, but okay. Maybe this is good.
When James returns home a week later, Melanie notices something odd about his photos.
I said, "Well, where are the other people that you went with?" And he said, "Oh, I don't want pictures of them." So there was only pictures of him and the resort and the beach. And that's all I saw.
A year later, unbeknownst to Melanie, James takes her to the same vacation spot where he took Molly.
It was so nice. We just had each other and we spent all our time together, and it was a great trip. We had so much fun.
At this point, James has been carrying on this double life for so long that he's gotten so used to it and comfortable, to the point where he's arrogant enough to take his wife on the same vacation he took his mistress.
In October 2017, when James lies and tells Molly his divorce is finalized, she's ready to take the next step.
The only thing she told me about the proposal was that she had asked James to marry her, and he said yes. Molly looked really happy and could tell that she was ready to get married.
Now he's got to figure out what he's going to do because he still has a wife.
Molly quickly busies herself prepping for her dream wedding. She picks April 29th, 2018 as the date, and she's planning to hold it at the Stony Creek Hotel, where Samantha Cohen is their wedding planner.
She had a smile on her face the entire time we would meet. She just had, this look in her eye of like, this is my day, I'm so excited, let's make this happen. She wanted to be the princess for the day. Every girl imagines their wedding day and wanting to be the bride or the princess walking down the aisle.
That's what she wanted, find Prince Charming, settle down happily ever after. But I thought, what's she thinking, she don't want to marry this guy. Nothing good can come of it.
During the Christmas holidays, just a few months before the wedding is to take place, James shares some devastating news with Molly.
He tells Molly that his ex-wife Melanie has been in a terrible car accident. She's actually on life support. And he needs to be there for his children and to help them with the care of their mother.
Molly felt bad for James, told him, if he needed her to back off any, and give him some space, she would, and that she was there for him, whatever he needed, that she understood he was doing it for his kids. I think it made Molly feel guilty about the wedding coming up.
Is Melanie's supposed accident a strategy for James to get out of the wedding? Melanie, in fact, is alive and well, for now. But soon, she will come perilously close to death.
There's this really strong gas smell in our bedroom.
I believe that Melanie was at a very high risk of being killed.
To think that you're so close to losing your life, it's terrifying. It was late at night, midnight, 1 o'clock. I woke up and I smelled gas. It was very, very strong in the bedroom. I thought, well, this is not dissipating. This is not normal. And Jim wasn't there. He wasn't in our bed. He wasn't in the bathroom. So I got up and I went to find Jim to tell him that there's this really strong gas smell.
She goes downstairs and she finds that all the windows and doors are closed.
Jim wasn't anywhere in the house. And I thought, this could be serious. This particular night, he was outside on the deck, smoking a cigarette. It was unusual for him to be outside smoking. He would usually just smoke in the dining room at the window. So I told him, I said, really strong gas smell, I don't know what it is. He said, okay, well, you stay out here. And he went back in the bedroom and opened the windows and just said, I don't know, it's probably some farm equipment outside.
But it's a little suspicious because the windows are closed, and when she goes outside, she doesn't have this overpowering odor anymore.
Eventually, the smell did go away, and I was able to go back to bed, so I don't have an explanation for that. It was so strange.
While Melanie worries about James and his odd behavior, Molly Watson is blissfully anticipating her fairy tale wedding. After 7 years of dating James, her dream is finally coming true.
Her excitement was so palpable. I mean, you watch her videos and she just radiates excitement and love.
Hi everyone, it's Molly, and here is the dress on me, and I have to say I was actually really impressed.
You can tell just by talking to her, she has always dreamt of her wedding. I mean, she had 3 wedding dresses. Like, this was not just any normal day in her life. She's been dreaming of how this wedding was gonna look for years. I think she finally found, her Prince Charming, and this was the next chapter of her life.
Molly seems unaware that James lacks the same enthusiasm, but his detached demeanor is obvious to others.
When I was meeting with James and Molly, it was all Molly giving the input. He really just sat there kind of staring off into space. He was a very quiet man, didn't smile often, and just kind of was there. He didn't really give much input into the conversations, and he just didn't seem like he really wanted to be there. He didn't seem to care.
He said, oh, well, we're getting married, as long as it shuts her up, whatever. That's kind of his attitude towards it.
On April 22nd, just a week before the wedding, James drops another bombshell about his supposed ex-wife.
We were told she was in this coma, and they determined that she would never recover from her injuries. From what Molly told me directly, Melanie's life support, they were going to go ahead and pull the plug because they decided that she was too brain damaged and that they were going to have to just let her go.
I, reached out to Molly to get a final in-person meeting scheduled with her and James, and she had emailed me back saying, I don't know if James will be able to make the meeting as his ex-wife had just passed away that weekend before.
James is lying, and Melanie is still very much alive, unbeknownst to Molly and everyone else around her.
I think James wanted so badly to get out of this predicament he had created that he was hoping by creating this tragic situation and backstory that maybe Molly would come to the conclusion to cancel the wedding, and that would sort of be his get out of jail free card. But that's not what happened. He needed to keep up the charade as the loving fiance, and so he doesn't cancel the wedding because he knows that's going to devastate her.
2 days before the wedding, James still hasn't told Molly the truth.
That Friday when he came in by himself after dropped everything off and paid, I asked him, how are you feeling? And the only words that he said was that she was driving him crazy.
It's probably pretty common for grooms to be a little annoyed with brides as it gets close to the wedding. But for James, I think Molly was driving him crazy because he knew the walls were closing in. He was still married to Melanie, and he had to figure something out quickly.
The night of April 27th, Molly abruptly leaves her parents' home without much of an explanation.
She was actually making something to eat when suddenly she got a phone call. And after that phone call, Molly leaves really quickly. And she just sort of rushed out of the house. Given that she was cooking, her parents felt like she would be back really quickly.
At his home, James tells his wife Melanie he's stepping out.
He was out in the garage, and then he came in and said he was going to go to a friend's house. This was about 7 o'clock, and then I went to bed about 7:30. I usually go to bed pretty early.
Later that night, a driver on a deserted road notices something unusual.
He sees these 2 vehicles parked on the side of the road. He figures one of them is having engine trouble, so he stops to see if he can help. An older man tells him that everything's fine, he can go. And so he proceeds on his way. On his way back, he passes the same spot, only this time there's only one vehicle.
The Monroe County Sheriff's Office got a call around 10:30 at night that a passerby named Glenn McSparron had found a woman in a very remote area of Monroe County on a low water crossing. He told police that there was a woman who was laying in front of a car on this dusty, dirty country road. Her eyes were open. She did not appear alive to him.
Investigators rush to the scene.
Police quickly identify the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the head. This woman is out in the middle of nowhere, and she's been shot execution style. It leads them to believe this was a planned murder, and someone lured her out there. And they identify her by finding a marriage license on her passenger seat that identifies her as Molly Watson, who's engaged to be married to James Addy.
In the early hours of April 28th, just one day before Tim Watson's sister is to be married, he gets a call from his dad.
As soon as I saw what time it was, I knew it was something serious. He said, "Timmy, the highway patrol just left our house. They found Molly dead on this dirt road." And immediately I was in shock.
About 2:30 in the morning, I got up and I looked out the window and there were 4 vehicles with flashing lights. I went to the door and Jim was there first. He opened the door for them, these 4 cops. So I asked them, "What's going on? Why are you here?" And nobody would answer me. Finally, somebody asked me, he said, "Who are you?" And I pointed to Jim and said, "Well, I'm his wife." And Jim said, "Yes, that's my wife." And then the mood kind of changed a little bit.
Investigators had no idea what they were walking into. They thought they were making a death notification to a fiancé, and they find out he's already married for 23 years. They discovered Melanie Addy, and everything changed. Suddenly, James Addy, who they expected to be the bereaved fiancé who would surely receive the worst news of his entire life, was now a suspect.
Detectives escort James into the dining room for an interview, while another investigator asks Melanie curious questions.
Where were you tonight? What did you do tonight? Do you know Molly Watson? She's been found dead. I didn't know who that was. I didn't know who Molly was. I didn't know how she was at all related to my family. They told me who Molly was and that they were going to get married. I asked him, do you have the right person? Are you sure you have the right person? Because that's my husband. I was numb. I was in shock. It was hard to get this through my head because this was my husband and this was our life, and this other person had no place in it, and the story did not make sense.
Out of Melanie's earshot, James comes clean to the officers about his relationship with Molly.
He admitted the affair and said that it had been going on for 7 years.
He tells them, though, that he had absolutely nothing to do with Molly's death.
They asked him where he was that evening. James Addy responded that he left the home around 7 o'clock to go visit a friend. He said the friend was not home, so he turned around and came back home and arrived around 8:30 that evening, and that he went to bed shortly thereafter.
Did James go to bed as he claims to police, or did he secretly meet Molly? When forensics examined the bride-to-be's computer, they find evidence to suggest she had been obsessed by one thing in the 24 hours leading up to her death. And it wasn't her wedding.
Molly Watson had been searching for evidence of Melanie Addy's death. She was searching to see if there was an obituary or any evidence of this horrible accident that had eventually led to Melanie's death. Of course, Melanie Addy was very much alive, and she was unable to find any evidence that she had passed away.
Did Molly come to the crushing realization that Melanie was alive and there would be no wedding?
I think she questioned James on it, and at that point, he knew the jig was up and he had to do something.
Back at the murder scene, investigators scour the area and find Molly's cell phone and a discarded t-shirt. Police also go through Molly's phone records and are able to piece together her last known movements.
The last phone call she ever made was 22 minutes long. 22 minutes, which is the exact amount of time it took Molly Watson to drive from her home to her death. The entire time she was on the phone with James Addy.
I think somehow he convinced her to meet up with him so they could talk about it, and he got her out in the middle of nowhere and took her life.
Police looked at the victimology of Molly Watson. Who did she know? Who in her life might want her dead? And they determined that only one person, James Addy, had the motive, means, and opportunity to take Molly's life.
James Addy is arrested and taken into custody. The next day, Melanie starts looking for evidence of James's double life.
I went out to the garage, which was kind of his domain. It was a lot of storage things that we kept up there, a lot of boxes. And I started looking a little closer at the boxes, and these were not my things. These were Molly's things. They had her name on the boxes. And that's when I found the photo album of them on vacation. And a lot of kitchen stuff, just household things that were at my house. She was planning on moving in, I guess. It was very overwhelming. I didn't know how to process this. He was home every night. I don't know when he saw her or how they formed a relationship over 7 years and why he would go forward with marrying her or planning this wedding when he was still married to me. How is this supposed to work? I don't know what he was thinking. I was just angry, just angry.
Melanie thinks back to the night of the gas leak and is left to wonder about James's possible intentions. The thought is chilling.
I started to put all of that together about the gas in the bedroom. I think the idea was for me not to wake up. I think I was supposed to die. I think he was trying to get rid of one of us.
Had James tried to kill Melanie but failed, so he chose Molly instead? James Addy has been arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of Molly Watson. A heartbroken Melanie confronts her husband.
I went to the jail a few days after he was arrested and asked him, what the hell? What are you doing? This is our life. And he didn't have any answers. He apologized for the affair. He never admitted that he killed her. He said that he was sorry and he didn't know we had such a perfect life. Too late now. He lost everything and he knew it. He knew everything was gone. He knew I wasn't going to stick around. I was not going to be his support system anymore. This was it. We were done. James's case goes before the court in the spring of 2021.
Prosecutors paint a picture for the jury of what they believe happened that fateful night.
The night of April 27th, I believe that he called Molly Watson and told her to get in her car and start driving to this remote area. She arrived at the low water crossing, opened the door, and he shot her once, and he panicked. He left Molly's body there for anyone to find. Going into the trial, we felt that the evidence against James Addy was overwhelming.
The T-shirt found by police is a key piece of evidence.
In addition to the T-shirt having gunshot residue on it and the victim's blood on it, there was something else important about the T-shirt. That T-shirt had been made by James Addy's daughter, Emma Addy.
And this was specific to Emma. She had made this shirt and kind of messed up the design a little bit.
She was able to identify that T-shirt as one that she had made and given to her father. So the T-shirt was extremely important because we know it came from the crime scene because it had Molly's blood on it. And we know that it came from the defendant's home.
James had told police that on the night of the murder, he'd gone out but was home by 8:30 p.m. His daughter, though, contradicts that story when faced with the daunting task of testifying against her own father.
Emma Addy was interviewed about her father's whereabouts, and she gave a very different story.
I was still up doing homework at around 10 p.m., and that's around the time that Dad came home.
He returns home and sees his daughter Emma still up. He's a little surprised, and Emma described him as being nervous. James gets in the shower right away. And Emma also notices that her dad does laundry, something that would normally be her mom's job.
And did you smell anything? Yes, I smelled bleach.
Emma Addy's testimony was key to dispute the alibi that James Addy had provided to the police. And to be able to come into court and to tell the world that your father lied to the police, it was incredible.
She had a tough job and she handled it. She did really, really well. She's an inspiration to me. She is. She's amazing.
I just plead with the jury to give this monster the max sentence possible.
On April 28th, 2021, what would have been Molly and James' third anniversary had they been married, James Addy is found guilty of Molly's murder.
I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
I just wanted justice for Molly. That's all I cared about. You know, as long as I heard those words guilty come out of the judge's mouth, and thank God they did.
He had the means, he had the motive. He didn't have a good alibi. He wasn't home that night. So it all kind of added up. He's absolutely responsible for this.
James Addy is convicted, but it's still hard to comprehend his sickening actions.
It's unfathomable that James thought the solution to the problem was to kill someone instead of just breaking up with them. In his mind, that was the right thing to do, and that's what's scary. It's terrifying that that is his way out.
Had he walked away, just never talked to her again, we'd be fine with that. You know, she'd be upset. She'd still be here. He chose to take her life. He's an evil person.
It's tragic to think that somebody who was so excited to be a bride and to have a happily ever after instead had this tragic ending.
The family, they're the ones that suffer in this. They are the true victims. They've lost Molly, and they will lose her, you know, at family get-togethers and holidays and vacations, and she's just not there for them.
She definitely knows how much I love her. I would like Molly to be remembered as the sweet, loving, giving person she was. She'd do anything for anybody.
I'd hug her and just say how sorry I am that this happened to her. And I hope she feels that justice has been served. And I hope she's okay.
I still go out to her gravesite and I have conversations with her, you know, and she said everything's fine, everything's okay.
As for Melanie, she has found a semblance of peace in her life.
It's good that it's finally over. I'm divorced and on my own, but I'm much happier on my own than I was married. I'm good all by myself, I really am. I'm just really lucky that I have a good job, a fun job, great coworkers. I have a good life. I'm happy.
On a warm summer morning in Phoenix, Arizona, a home stood quietly as if nothing had changed. The sunlight was already beginning to spread across the desert landscape. The city was waking up beneath a familiar blue sky, the kind of sky that stretched endlessly above the streets and neighborhoods of the Valley of the Sun. Cars moved along the roads, people started their daily routines, and thousands of ordinary lives continued without interruption. But inside one apartment in Northeast Phoenix, something was terribly wrong. A woman who should have been there was gone. Her belongings remained exactly where they were supposed to be. Her vehicle had not disappeared. Her personal items were still inside. The small details of her everyday life seemed frozen in place, like a photograph taken moments before something impossible happened. Michelle Bernstein Schultz had vanished. There was no goodbye message. No clear explanation. No obvious sign that she had chosen to walk away from the life she had built. And perhaps the most unsettling part was not only that Michelle was missing. It was that everything she left behind seemed to suggest she never intended to leave at all. For the people who loved her, the disappearance did not feel like a mystery that began with a woman walking out of her home. It felt like a question that began with someone taking her away. Michelle was not known as someone who would simply disappear without telling anyone. She had relationships, responsibilities, routines, and connections. She was part of a world where people knew her, where her absence would be noticed. When someone disappears voluntarily, there are usually traces. A message. A financial transaction. A packed bag. A destination. Something. But in Michelle's case, the silence was almost complete. The woman who had shared her life with family and friends suddenly became a missing person, leaving behind only fragments of a story that no one could fully understand. The morning her disappearance was discovered, those closest to Michelle faced a reality that many families of missing people know all too well. The terrifying space between knowing and not knowing. A loved one can be missing for hours, and every minute feels heavier than the last. At first, people search for reasonable explanations. Maybe she went somewhere unexpectedly. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she needed some time alone. Maybe there was a simple misunderstanding. But as time passes, those explanations begin to lose their power. The questions become darker. Where is she? Who was the last person to see her? What happened inside that home? And why did she leave behind the things she would normally never abandon? Michelle's disappearance became more disturbing because of the circumstances surrounding the final known moments of her life. According to information shared by her family, Michelle had not been feeling well before she disappeared. Her boyfriend later stated that he had slept in the living room rather than disturb her while she rested. By the next morning, Michelle was gone. But the details surrounding that morning raised questions. Her vehicle remained. Her phone was left behind. Her wallet was still there. Many personal belongings that would normally travel with someone leaving home were untouched. Even her dog, an important part of her daily life, remained behind. For those who knew Michelle, these details were impossible to ignore. A person planning to leave usually takes pieces of their life with them. They take their identification, their money, their phone, the things they need to survive outside their normal routine. Michelle appeared to have taken none of those things. Instead, it looked as though her normal day had been interrupted. As investigators began looking into her disappearance, one of the most difficult challenges emerged. There was no clear crime scene. There was no confirmed evidence proving exactly what happened. There was no body. There was no final message explaining her choices. Only an empty space where Michelle should have been. Missing person cases are among the most emotionally complicated investigations because the absence itself becomes the evidence. Detectives must search through what is not there. They examine ordinary objects. They study daily habits. They reconstruct conversations. They look for changes that others might overlook. A cup left behind. A phone that never moved. A vehicle parked in the same place. A routine suddenly broken. Every small detail can become a possible clue. Every silence can become meaningful. For Michelle's family, the waiting was devastating. They were not mourning someone they knew they had lost. They were trapped in uncertainty. There was still hope because hope is often the only thing families of missing people can hold onto. But hope came with pain. Every unknown phone call could bring news. Every knock on the door could change everything. Every day without answers created another layer of fear. The family began asking questions that no one wanted to ask. Could Michelle have left on her own? Could something unexpected have happened? Could someone have entered her life and changed it forever? And perhaps the most painful question of all. Was Michelle still alive somewhere, waiting for someone to find her? The investigation would eventually focus attention on the circumstances surrounding the apartment and the people closest to Michelle. Whenever someone disappears, investigators often begin with the closest relationships because those connections contain the most information about a person's final days. The people who loved them. The people who saw them. The people who knew their habits. The people who might know what happened before the disappearance. Michelle's boyfriend became an important figure in the story because he was among the last known people connected to her before she vanished. His account of what happened became part of the investigation and part of the questions raised by Michelle's family. They questioned the timeline. They questioned certain reactions. They questioned whether everything about that final morning made sense. But as with any unresolved case, suspicion is not the same as proof. There were questions, but no official conclusion. There were concerns, but no confirmed answer. And somewhere between those two realities was the truth that investigators were trying to uncover. The disappearance of Michelle Bernstein Schultz is not a story about a simple missing person report. It is a story about a woman whose life suddenly stopped being understood. It is a story about a family searching through uncertainty. It is a story about unanswered questions that grow heavier with every passing year. Phoenix is a city known for its wide streets, endless desert, and bright skies. But even in a place filled with sunlight, some mysteries remain hidden in the shadows. Michelle's case became one of those mysteries. A woman entered what should have been an ordinary night. She had a home. She had relationships. She had a life waiting for her the next morning. But when that morning arrived, Michelle was no longer there. Only her belongings remained. Only unanswered questions remained. And only the hope that one day, someone would finally discover what happened behind the closed doors of that Phoenix apartment. Because for Michelle's family, this was never just a missing person case. It was the disappearance of someone they loved. Someone whose story was not finished. Someone whose name they refused to let disappear. Phoenix, Arizona, is a city built on contrasts. It is a place where the harshness of the desert meets the comfort of modern life. A place where towering mountains surround neighborhoods filled with quiet streets, where palm trees line roads beneath a relentless sun, and where millions of people build ordinary lives beneath one of the widest skies in America. For many residents, Phoenix represents opportunity. It is a city of new beginnings, of people moving there to escape colder climates, to find work, to raise families, or simply to create a different future. But every large city also carries hidden stories. Behind the bright neighborhoods and busy highways are countless personal struggles, private conflicts, and unanswered questions. Every apartment building contains hundreds of lives. Every door hides a story that outsiders may never know. And somewhere within this enormous city was the home where Michelle Bernstein Schultz's life took a terrifying and unexplained turn. Michelle lived in Northeast Phoenix, an area where suburban streets, apartment communities, and everyday routines created a sense of normalcy. The kind of place where neighbors could pass each other without knowing the full stories happening behind their walls. It was not a location that appeared dangerous or unusual. There were no obvious signs that something terrible could happen there. That was part of what made Michelle's disappearance so unsettling. The place where she was last known to be was not a dark alley, not an abandoned building, not a remote area where people expected danger. It was home. A place that should have represented safety. A place where Michelle should have been able to close the door, rest, and wake up to another normal day. Instead, that home became the center of a mystery. To understand why Michelle's disappearance shocked the people around her, it is important to understand the life she had built before that moment. Michelle Bernstein Schultz was not someone who lived on the edge of society. She was not a person constantly surrounded by chaos or uncertainty. From the perspective of her family and those who knew her, she had a relatively stable life. She had connections. She had routines. She had people who cared about her. That is what made the idea of her simply walking away so difficult for those closest to her to accept. People who disappear voluntarily often leave behind clues of emotional distance. Sometimes they withdraw from friends. Sometimes they make unusual financial decisions. Sometimes they communicate their intentions, even indirectly. But according to those who knew Michelle, there was no obvious warning sign that she was preparing to abandon everything. There was no clear indication that she wanted to start over somewhere else. No explanation for why she would leave behind the basic things she needed. No reason why she would cut herself off from the people who mattered to her. Her disappearance forced everyone around her to look backward. They began examining ordinary moments that had once seemed meaningless. A conversation. A text message. A change in behavior. A small disagreement. A normal evening that, in hindsight, might have contained something important. That is one of the cruel realities of missing person investigations. The moment before a person disappears rarely feels like the final moment. Families do not know they are experiencing the last conversation. They do not know they are seeing someone for the last time. They do not know that an ordinary goodbye may become a memory they replay thousands of times. Michelle's loved ones were suddenly forced to reconstruct a life from fragments. They had to ask questions that no family wants to ask. What was happening in Michelle's life before she vanished? Was she afraid of something? Was she struggling with something privately? Was there anyone who knew more than they were saying? And most importantly, did someone else decide that Michelle's life should suddenly stop? The timeline leading up to June 30, 2022, became the foundation of the investigation. According to information shared by her family, Michelle had been feeling unwell before she disappeared. Her boyfriend later stated that because she was not feeling well, he chose to sleep in the living room instead of disturbing her. On the surface, it was an explanation that sounded ordinary. Many couples have moments where one person rests separately because they are sick, tired, or simply need space. But in a missing person investigation, ordinary details are examined differently. Investigators do not have the luxury of assuming something is harmless. They have to consider every possibility. A simple choice can become a significant detail. A timeline can become a critical piece of evidence. A statement can become something that must be carefully compared with other information. As investigators looked into Michelle's disappearance, the question was not only what happened after she vanished. The question was, what happened during the final hours before anyone realized she was gone? The hours when Michelle was still inside the world she knew. The hours when she was still surrounded by familiar objects, familiar walls, and familiar people. The hours before her name became associated with a missing person investigation. One of the most important aspects of the case was the absence of movement. Her car remained where it was. Her phone was not taken. Her wallet was left behind. The possessions that represented her connection to the outside world remained inside the home. These details created a disturbing possibility. If Michelle had chosen to leave, where was she planning to go? How could she function without the things people normally carry every day? How could she begin a new life without the tools needed to do so? For investigators and for Michelle's family, these questions became impossible to ignore. The apartment itself became a place filled with unanswered possibilities. Every room held a memory. Every object represented a moment from Michelle's life. But without knowing what happened, those same objects became painful reminders. The phone that did not ring. The vehicle that did not move. The belongings that waited for someone who never returned. In missing person cases, the emotional weight often comes from ordinary objects. A missing person's home can become a frozen moment in time. The clothes they planned to wear. The items they used every day. The things they touched only hours before disappearing. To investigators, these can become clues. To families, they become reminders of someone who should still be there. As the days passed, Michelle's disappearance became more than a local concern. Her family began searching for answers. They wanted people to know her name. They wanted attention brought to the case. They wanted anyone with information to come forward. Because every missing person case depends on one crucial factor. Someone knowing something. A witness. A detail. A memory. A piece of information that had previously seemed unimportant. The Phoenix Police Department's missing persons investigators faced the difficult task of determining what category Michelle's disappearance belonged to. Was this a voluntary disappearance? Was it an accident? Was it the result of foul play? Without a confirmed crime scene or physical evidence, investigators had to carefully follow every possible direction. But the longer Michelle remained missing, the more difficult the situation became. Time is one of the greatest enemies in any disappearance case. The first hours can provide crucial evidence. The first days can reveal patterns. The first weeks can determine whether important information is still available. As time passes, memories become less precise. Evidence can disappear. People can move on. But for Michelle's family, time did not reduce the need for answers. It increased it. The calendar continued moving. The city continued living. People went to work, drove through Phoenix streets, and continued their daily routines. But for those searching for Michelle, life had stopped on the day she disappeared. They remained trapped between two impossible realities. The hope that Michelle could still be found. And the fear that something irreversible had happened. The mystery surrounding Michelle Bernstein Schultz was only beginning. The investigation would soon move deeper into the final moments before her disappearance, the people closest to her, and the unanswered questions surrounding that morning. Because somewhere between the last time Michelle was seen and the moment everyone realized she was gone, something happened. And finding that missing piece would become the only way to bring her story out of the shadows. Before her name appeared in missing person reports, before strangers began searching for clues about her disappearance, before her family was forced to speak about her in the past tense while still holding on to hope, Michelle Bernstein Schultz was simply a person living her life. She was not a headline. She was not a mystery. She was a daughter, a friend, a partner, and a woman with her own memories, dreams, routines, and ordinary moments that mattered to the people who knew her. When a person disappears, the world often begins by focusing on the mystery. People ask what happened. They ask who was responsible. They search for clues hidden inside the final hours. But behind every missing person case is a human story that existed long before the disappearance. A lifetime of experiences. A collection of relationships. Thousands of moments that cannot be reduced to one terrifying day. For Michelle's family, the most important thing was that people remembered the woman she was before she became known as someone who vanished. Because Michelle was more than the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. She was someone who had built a life in Phoenix. Someone who had people who cared about her. Someone whose absence created a space that could not simply be filled. The details publicly available about Michelle's personal history are limited, but those closest to her described her as someone who lived a relatively stable life. She maintained relationships, had a normal routine, and was connected to the people around her. That sense of normalcy became one of the most painful parts of the case. There was no simple explanation. No obvious reason that could explain why someone like Michelle would suddenly disappear. Her family struggled with the idea that she could have simply walked away. Because people who know someone well often understand their patterns. They know how that person behaves when they are stressed. They know how they communicate when they are upset. They know the small habits that outsiders would never notice. They know what feels normal and what feels completely out of character. And according to those who loved Michelle, the idea of her leaving without taking anything with her did not match the person they knew. A person's belongings often tell a story. The items they carry every day reveal their connection to the world. A phone contains conversations, photographs, memories, and contacts. A wallet contains identity. Keys represent access to home and personal spaces. A vehicle represents freedom and movement. When these things remain behind, they raise difficult questions. Why would someone leave without them? Where would they go? How would they survive? For Michelle's loved ones, these were not just investigative questions. They were emotional wounds. Every object left behind represented a piece of the life she had built. Her home was not simply a location. It was a place where she had created comfort. A place where she had her belongings. A place where she had routines. A place where she should have been safe. The fact that she disappeared from that environment made the situation even harder for those closest to her to understand. There was also another important part of Michelle's life that became connected to the investigation, her relationships. Like anyone, Michelle existed within a network of people. Family. Friends. Those closest to her knew her personality, her habits, and the details of her everyday life. And when someone disappears, those relationships become a map for investigators. They look at who was around the person. Who communicated with them? Who saw them last? Who might have information? But for families, this process can be painful. The people who should be sources of comfort can also become part of the investigation. Every relationship must be examined. Every timeline must be questioned. Every statement must be compared with evidence. The investigation surrounding Michelle would eventually bring attention to her boyfriend, who was one of the last known people connected to her before she disappeared. His account became an important part of understanding the final hours before Michelle was reported missing. According to information shared by the family, Michelle had not been feeling well before her disappearance. Her boyfriend stated that he slept in the living room while she rested because he did not want to disturb her. On its own, that detail might seem like a normal decision between two people sharing a home. But after someone disappears, every detail becomes part of a larger puzzle. The question is no longer only what happened. The question becomes, does the explanation match everything else we know? For Michelle's family, certain parts of the situation raised concerns. They questioned aspects of the timeline. They questioned how quickly Michelle's absence was noticed. They questioned reactions and circumstances surrounding the morning she vanished. But suspicion and evidence are two different things. A question does not automatically become an answer. A concern does not automatically become proof. And in Michelle's case, the public information available does not establish that anyone was responsible for her disappearance. The uncertainty surrounding the case is part of what makes it so painful. There is no final chapter. No moment where investigators can explain exactly what happened. No courtroom where all the evidence is presented. No official conclusion that gives the family peace. Instead, Michelle's loved ones are left with the hardest situation imaginable. A person they love is missing, but the story remains unfinished. For families of missing people, grief becomes complicated. Traditional grief comes with an ending. A goodbye. A funeral. A moment where people gather and remember someone who is gone. But when someone disappears, there is no clear ending. There is only waiting. Hope and fear exist together. One day, a family member may believe that answers are close. The next day, they may feel overwhelmed by the silence. Every anniversary becomes painful. Every new piece of information becomes important. Every unidentified person report, every possible sighting, every message from a stranger can create a sudden wave of emotion. Because somewhere out there, there is always the possibility that the missing person's story is not over. That hope can keep families searching. But it can also keep wounds open. Michelle's case represents the emotional reality of many missing person investigations. Behind the official reports are families who continue living with unanswered questions. Behind the statistics are individuals with names, personalities, and people who love them. It is easy for the public to become focused on the mystery. But for Michelle's family, the mystery is only one part of the story. The other part is the woman herself. The person who laughed. The person who had memories. The person who had plans. The person who mattered. A missing person investigation begins with a disappearance, but it should never end with forgetting. Michelle Bernstein Schultz was not just a woman who vanished from a Phoenix apartment. She was someone who had a place in the world before that moment. Someone whose life had meaning before investigators began searching for clues. Someone whose family continues to hope that one day they will understand what happened. And until that day arrives, Michelle's story remains unfinished. The questions remain. The search continues. And behind every unanswered question is the memory of the woman at the center of it all. Every disappearance has a moment when an ordinary life suddenly crosses into the unknown. For Michelle Bernstein Schultz, that moment was not marked by a dramatic scene witnessed by strangers. There was no public confrontation, no obvious warning, no single event that immediately revealed something terrible had happened. Instead, the mystery began quietly. It began inside a home. It began during a period of time that, at first glance, appeared completely ordinary. And that is what made it so difficult to understand. The final known hours of Michelle's life became the most important part of the investigation because somewhere within that narrow window existed the answer to what happened to her. The challenge was that no one knew exactly where that answer was hidden. Was it in a conversation that happened before she disappeared? Was it in a decision made during the night? Was it in something someone noticed but did not consider important at the time? Or was the truth hidden in a moment that nobody witnessed? On June 30, 2022, Michelle Bernstein Schultz was reported missing after she disappeared from her apartment in Northeast Phoenix, Arizona. For the people who loved her, the day began like any other day. The sun rose over Phoenix. The city moved forward. People left their homes for work. Morning routines unfolded across neighborhoods throughout the valley. But inside Michelle's world, something had changed. Something had happened between the last time she was known to be there and the moment people realized she was gone. That gap became the center of the investigation. Before Michelle disappeared, according to information shared by her family, she had not been feeling well. It was a small detail. A detail that might have seemed unimportant under normal circumstances. People get sick. People rest. People have difficult days. But after a person vanishes, every detail from the final hours becomes important. A headache. A conversation. A decision to sleep in another room. A change in routine. Things that once seemed meaningless can become pieces of a much larger puzzle. Michelle's boyfriend later stated that because she was not feeling well, he slept in the living room rather than disturb her. Again, on the surface, it was a situation that could happen in many relationships. One person feels unwell. The other person gives them space. A normal choice. A normal night. But the following morning, Michelle was no longer there. And suddenly, that ordinary decision became part of a much larger question. What happened while Michelle was alone? What happened during those hours when nobody outside the apartment knew anything was wrong? The first signs that something was unusual came from the things Michelle left behind. Her vehicle remained. Her phone was still there. Her wallet was untouched. Her personal belongings had not been gathered. For investigators, these details created immediate questions. For her family, they created fear. Because Michelle's belongings represented more than objects. They represented the way she lived. The phone she used to communicate. The wallet that carried her identity. The vehicle that allowed her to move through the world. These were not random items. They were extensions of her daily life. And they were still there. The possibility that Michelle had simply chosen to leave became harder for those closest to her to understand. A person preparing to disappear usually makes choices. They take what they need. They make plans. They create some kind of separation from the life they are leaving. But Michelle appeared to have left behind the things that connected her to the outside world. The situation became even more concerning because her dog also remained behind. For many people, pets are not simply animals living in the home. They are companions. They are part of a daily routine. They are part of a person's emotional world. Leaving a pet behind without explanation can be unusual, especially for someone who cares deeply about that animal. To Michelle's family, this was another detail suggesting that her disappearance was not something she had planned. It painted a disturbing picture. A person who seemed to have vanished without preparing to vanish. A person whose life remained physically present even though she was gone. The apartment became the center of countless questions. A place that had once represented normal life suddenly became the last known location connected to Michelle. Investigators had to examine the timeline carefully. Who was there? Who had access? What happened during the hours before she disappeared? What information could be confirmed? What information remained uncertain? In missing person cases, time creates enormous pressure. The first hours after someone disappears can be critical. Investigators search for digital evidence. They examine communication records. They look at financial activity. They speak with people who may have information. They attempt to determine whether the person left voluntarily or whether something prevented them from doing so. But Michelle's case presented a difficult challenge. There was no confirmed crime scene. No public evidence showing exactly what happened. No physical discovery that immediately explained where she went. The investigation existed in a space between possibilities. And that is one of the hardest situations for detectives. A missing person case requires investigators to consider every possibility. They cannot assume the worst without evidence. But they also cannot ignore warning signs. They must keep an open mind while following the facts. Was Michelle's disappearance the result of a personal decision? Was it an accident? Was someone else involved? Each possibility required careful examination. As days passed without answers, the emotional impact on Michelle's family grew. The initial shock of realizing someone is missing is often followed by a painful search for certainty. Families replay the last known moments again and again. They think about conversations. They think about small details. They wonder if there was something they missed. Something they should have noticed. Something that could have changed what happened. The human mind naturally searches for patterns. It tries to create explanations when reality feels impossible to accept. For Michelle's family, the absence of information became its own form of suffering. They were not dealing with a confirmed loss. They were dealing with uncertainty. And uncertainty can be one of the most painful experiences a person can endure. Because without answers, there is no way to move forward. No way to truly grieve. No way to know whether to hold on to hope or prepare for the worst. As investigators continued looking into Michelle's disappearance, attention turned toward the circumstances surrounding her final known moments. The people closest to her. The environment where she was last seen. The timeline of events. The statements given. Every piece mattered. Every inconsistency, if one existed, needed to be examined. Every explanation needed to be compared with what investigators could verify. The disappearance of Michelle Bernstein Schultz was not a case defined by one obvious piece of evidence. It was defined by absence. The absence of Michelle. The absence of answers. The absence of a clear explanation. And that absence created a mystery that continued to grow. A woman had entered a night believing she would wake up the next morning. A woman had a home, a routine, and a life. But somewhere between that night and the morning of June 30, 2022, something happened. Something that changed everything. And until that moment is understood, Michelle's story remains trapped between hope and heartbreak. A disappearance without a clear beginning. A search without a final destination. A question that still waits for an answer. Where did Michelle Bernstein Schultz go? When someone disappears, the first moments after their absence is discovered often become the most important moments of the entire investigation. For Michelle Bernstein Schultz's family, the realization that something was wrong did not come from a dramatic discovery. It came from something much quieter. Something that should have been ordinary. But was not. Michelle was not where she was supposed to be. And the more people looked around, the more unsettling the situation became. Because nothing about the scene suggested a woman preparing to leave her life behind. Instead, everything seemed to suggest interruption. A routine had been broken. A life had been paused. And nobody knew why. Inside the Phoenix apartment where Michelle was last known to be, the details told a confusing story. Her belongings remained. Her vehicle remained. The things that represented her daily existence were still there. But Michelle was gone. For investigators, this created one of the most difficult situations in any missing person case. A person can disappear in many different ways. Sometimes there is a clear trail. A vehicle traveling away. A financial record. A message. A witness. A camera recording. But sometimes, there is only silence. And silence forces investigators to search for meaning in the smallest details. The apartment became the first place where questions had to be answered. What did the environment reveal? Did anything appear unusual? Did anything suggest a struggle? Did anything indicate Michelle had planned to leave? Or did the evidence suggest that something happened unexpectedly? Every missing person investigation begins with uncertainty. The first responsibility is determining whether the person is missing voluntarily or whether they may be in danger. This distinction changes everything. If someone leaves intentionally, investigators must understand why. If someone disappears against their will, every second becomes more urgent. In Michelle's case, the circumstances immediately created concern. Her family believed the situation did not match the behavior of someone choosing to walk away. They pointed to the things she left behind. The phone. The wallet. The vehicle. The personal items that remained exactly where they were. These were not simply possessions. They were pieces of evidence that created a picture of Michelle's final known moments. A phone is often one of the most important objects in a modern disappearance case. It contains communication records, location information, photographs, and connections to other people. For many people, a phone is something they rarely leave behind. It is carried everywhere. It is checked constantly. It connects them to the outside world. The fact that Michelle's phone remained behind became one of the details that troubled those searching for her. Why would someone leave without the device they use every day? Why would someone disappear while leaving behind a tool that would allow them to contact others? Her wallet created similar questions. Money. Identification. Cards. Personal information. These are things most people automatically take when leaving home. Even during an unexpected situation, many people would instinctively grab these items. But Michelle did not appear to have done that. Her vehicle remaining behind added another layer of uncertainty. Phoenix is a large city. A city where transportation is often necessary. A person attempting to leave the area would usually need a way to travel. The fact that Michelle's vehicle was still there raised questions about how she could have left and where she could have gone. Then there was her dog. A detail that may seem small to outsiders but carried emotional significance for those who knew Michelle. Pets are often deeply connected to their owners' routines. They depend on them. They are part of daily life. They are present during quiet moments, stressful moments, and ordinary days. Leaving a pet behind without explanation can be a powerful indication that something unexpected happened. For Michelle's family, this was another reason they struggled to believe she had simply chosen to disappear. The scene did not tell a simple story. Instead, it created a series of contradictions. If Michelle left voluntarily, why were her essential belongings still there? If she planned to start over somewhere else, why leave behind the things she would need? If she intended to disappear, why was there no clear preparation? These questions became the foundation of the investigation. As detectives examined the circumstances surrounding Michelle's disappearance, they had to separate assumptions from facts. The family's fears were understandable. But investigators needed evidence. They needed timelines. They needed information that could be confirmed. They needed to understand exactly what happened before and after Michelle was last known to be present. One of the most challenging aspects of missing person investigations is that the first people searching for answers are often emotionally connected to the missing person. Family members do not see a case as a puzzle. They see a person. They see someone they love. Every unanswered question creates pain. Every possibility creates fear. For Michelle's family, the search was not only about finding information. It was about finding her. They wanted to know where she was. They wanted to know if she was safe. They wanted to know what happened. And most importantly, they wanted the world to remember that Michelle was a real person, not just a missing person report. As investigators continued examining the case, attention naturally turned toward the people closest to Michelle. In many missing person cases, the first questions investigators ask involve the final known interactions. Who saw the person last? Who spoke with them? Who was around them during those final hours? These questions are not accusations. They are standard investigative steps. But they can be emotionally difficult because they require examining relationships that once represented trust and safety. Michelle's boyfriend became an important part of understanding the timeline because he was among the last people known to have been around her before she disappeared. His account of that night became part of the investigation. According to information shared by the family, Michelle was not feeling well, and he said he slept in the living room so he would not disturb her. Investigators would need to examine this account alongside other available information. The goal of any investigation is not to follow emotion. It is to follow evidence. But when a person disappears under unclear circumstances, every statement becomes important. Every timeline becomes important. Every detail becomes something investigators must consider. The days following Michelle's disappearance brought increasing pressure. The longer someone remains missing, the more difficult the search can become. Evidence can disappear. Memories can fade. People may forget small details that could have been important. But families do not stop searching simply because time passes. For them, every day without answers is another day without closure. The investigation into Michelle's disappearance continued without the discovery that families always hope for. There was no moment where investigators found a clear explanation. No final piece of evidence that immediately revealed the truth. Instead, there remained only questions. A woman missing. A home filled with her belongings. A timeline that needed to be understood. And a family waiting for someone to explain what happened. The empty space left by Michelle became the center of everything. The empty chair. The unanswered phone. The belongings waiting exactly where they had been left. The life that appeared frozen in time. Because sometimes the most haunting part of a disappearance is not what is found. It is what is missing. And in Michelle Bernstein Schultz's case, the missing piece was Michelle herself. When Michelle Bernstein Schultz disappeared, investigators were faced with one of the most difficult types of cases in law enforcement. A disappearance without a clear beginning. A possible crime without a confirmed crime scene. A person missing, but with no definitive evidence showing exactly what happened. The investigation had to move carefully. Every possibility had to remain open. Every piece of information had to be examined. Because in cases like Michelle's, the truth is often hidden not in one dramatic discovery, but in hundreds of small details that slowly reveal a bigger picture. The first priority was determining what kind of disappearance investigators were dealing with. Was Michelle someone who had chosen to leave? Had something unexpected happened to her? Or was another person involved? Those questions shaped every decision that followed. Investigators began by looking at Michelle's life before she disappeared. They examined her relationships, her routines, her recent activities, her communications, the people she interacted with. The goal was to understand whether there had been any signs that Michelle was preparing for a major change in her life. A sudden move. A personal crisis. A reason to disappear. But according to the information shared by her family, there was no obvious indication that Michelle planned to abandon her life. To those who knew her, the circumstances did not resemble someone starting over. They resembled someone whose life had been interrupted. That distinction became extremely important. Because a voluntary disappearance usually leaves behind a trail. Even when people attempt to vanish, they often leave evidence of their intentions. Money withdrawn. Messages sent. Travel arrangements. Changes in behavior. Conversations with friends or family. But Michelle's case appeared different. The things she needed to continue living outside her home were still there. Her phone. Her wallet. Her vehicle. Her personal belongings. The absence of these items became one of the central questions investigators had to answer. As detectives reviewed the circumstances, they focused on the timeline. Time is one of the most powerful tools in any investigation. A timeline creates boundaries. It tells investigators when something could have happened and when it could not have happened. The final known moments before a person disappears are often the most important. Who was with them? Who contacted them? What were they doing? What changed? In Michelle's case, the timeline centered around the night before she was reported missing and the morning when people realized she was gone. According to statements shared by Michelle's family, she had not been feeling well before her disappearance. Her boyfriend stated that he slept in the living room rather than disturb her while she rested. That explanation became one of the details investigators had to examine. In any investigation, statements are compared against evidence. A person's memory. Digital records. Physical evidence. Witness information. Everything must fit together. If something does not match, investigators look deeper. The process is not about immediately deciding who is responsible. It is about understanding what happened. However, for Michelle's family, the circumstances surrounding that final night created concern. They questioned certain aspects of the timeline. They questioned how Michelle's disappearance was discovered. They questioned the actions and reactions of the people around her. Their questions were driven by fear and the desire to find her. They wanted answers. They wanted investigators to look at every possibility. And they wanted Michelle's disappearance treated with urgency. As the investigation continued, attention naturally focused on the people closest to Michelle. This is common in missing person cases. The people closest to someone often have the most information about their life. They know their habits. They know their plans. They know their struggles. They may know things that investigators cannot discover from documents or technology alone. But close relationships can also make investigations emotionally complicated. The people who should provide comfort can become part of the search for answers. Every conversation must be examined. Every timeline must be verified. Every statement must be evaluated. Michelle's boyfriend became an important figure in understanding the final known period before her disappearance. Because he was one of the last people known to have been connected to Michelle before she vanished, investigators needed to understand his account of events. This did not mean he was officially responsible. The public information available does not establish that he committed any crime. No confirmed charges were filed against him. No official conclusion stated that he caused Michelle's disappearance. But in an unresolved case, investigators must examine all relevant information. That includes information involving the people closest to the missing person. The investigation also faced another major challenge: the lack of a confirmed crime scene. Without clear evidence of what happened, detectives had to search through possibilities. If Michelle left voluntarily, where would she go? If she did not leave voluntarily, what happened inside the apartment? If someone else was involved, how did they leave no obvious trace? These questions made the case extremely difficult. A missing person investigation can sometimes become a race against time. The longer a person is missing, the harder it can become to find answers. But Michelle's case did not provide investigators with an obvious path. There was no confirmed location where she had gone. No confirmed person who had taken her. No confirmed event explaining her disappearance. Only uncertainty. For Michelle's family, that uncertainty became a daily struggle. They were forced to live between two painful possibilities. The possibility that Michelle was alive somewhere and waiting to be found. And the possibility that something terrible had happened. That emotional conflict is one of the hardest experiences for families of missing people. Hope keeps them searching. But uncertainty keeps them suffering. They cannot fully move forward. They cannot fully say goodbye. They remain connected to a future that may bring answers. As investigators continued working the case, they examined every available lead. Missing person cases often depend on information from the public. A person who saw something unusual. Someone who remembers a conversation. Someone who noticed a detail that seemed meaningless at the time. A single piece of information can sometimes change everything. But as time passed, Michelle's case remained unresolved. The investigation continued without the breakthrough that everyone hoped for. No discovery. No definitive explanation. No moment where the mystery finally opened. Instead, the case remained suspended. A woman missing. A family searching. Investigators following every possible path. And a series of questions that refused to disappear. The disappearance of Michelle Bernstein Schultz became a reminder of how difficult these cases can be. Because sometimes the hardest mysteries are not the ones where evidence points in the wrong direction. They are the ones where there is not enough evidence at all. Where every possibility exists. Where every answer creates another question. Where a family is left looking for someone who should have simply come home. And as the investigation continued, everyone involved waited for the one thing that could change the entire case. A breakthrough. A discovery. A piece of information that could finally explain what happened to Michelle Bernstein Schultz. In every major investigation, there is a moment that detectives hope will arrive. The phone call that changes everything. The piece of evidence that suddenly connects the unanswered questions. The witness who remembers the one detail everyone else missed. The discovery that transforms uncertainty into understanding. For many cases, that moment becomes known as the breakthrough. It is the turning point where a mystery begins to unravel. But for Michelle Bernstein Schultz's disappearance, the breakthrough everyone hoped for never arrived. Instead, the case remained trapped in one of the most frustrating places an investigation can exist. Between suspicion and certainty. Between questions and answers. Between hope and heartbreak. The investigation continued searching for the missing piece that could explain what happened. But the truth remained hidden. From the beginning, one of the biggest challenges was the absence of a clear trail. There was no confirmed location where Michelle went after leaving her home. There was no public evidence showing a journey away from Phoenix. There was no discovery that immediately revealed whether she had left voluntarily or whether someone else was involved. The investigators were left with a puzzle where many of the most important pieces were missing. And in a case like this, the absence of evidence becomes one of the biggest obstacles. Detectives can follow a suspect. They can analyze a crime scene. They can reconstruct a timeline. But when someone disappears without leaving behind obvious clues, investigators are forced to search through possibilities. They must ask, what would make sense? What does not make sense? What explanation fits the available facts? And what explanation creates even more questions? For Michelle's family, the idea that she simply walked away remained difficult to accept. They looked at the circumstances surrounding her disappearance and saw a woman who appeared to have left without preparing to leave. Her phone was behind. Her wallet was behind. Her vehicle was behind. Her dog was behind. The things that connected her to her everyday life remained exactly where they were. To those who loved Michelle, these details felt significant. They did not look like the actions of someone planning a new beginning. They looked like signs of a life interrupted. But investigations cannot be built only on what feels unusual. They require evidence that can be verified. And that was the challenge. The questions were there, but the answers were not. As investigators continued examining the case, they had to consider every possibility. Sometimes missing people cases are resolved because investigators discover that the person left voluntarily. Sometimes they find evidence of an accident. Sometimes they uncover evidence of a crime. But without knowing which direction the case belongs to, investigators must carefully explore all paths. The people closest to Michelle remained an important part of the investigation. The final known interactions. The last conversations. The people who were present before she disappeared. These details often provide the foundation for understanding what happened. Michelle's boyfriend was among those whose actions and statements became part of the timeline investigators needed to examine. According to information shared by Michelle's family, he stated that Michelle was not feeling well before she disappeared and that he slept in the living room so he would not disturb her. For investigators, this statement would need to be considered alongside all other available information. A statement alone does not prove innocence or guilt. It is simply one piece of the larger picture. And in Michelle's case, that larger picture remained incomplete. The public attention surrounding the disappearance also brought increased discussion and speculation. Whenever a person disappears, people outside the investigation often attempt to solve the mystery themselves. They examine details. They create theories. They search for explanations. Sometimes public attention helps bring forward important information. A person may remember something. A witness may decide to speak. A forgotten detail may become important. But speculation can also create problems. Unconfirmed theories can spread quickly. People can become convinced of explanations that have not been proven. For Michelle's family, the most important thing was not speculation. It was finding Michelle. It was discovering the truth. It was bringing an end to the uncertainty that had taken over their lives. As time passed, the investigation entered the difficult stage known to many families of missing persons. The stage where urgency remains, but answers become harder to find. The first days and weeks after a disappearance are often filled with activity. Searches. Interviews. Public appeals. Investigative efforts. But as months pass, the silence becomes heavier. The missing person remains missing. The questions remain unanswered. And the family must continue living with the unknown. Michelle's case became especially painful because there was no final moment of understanding. No confirmed explanation. No evidence that allowed everyone to know what happened. Instead, the family was left with memories. Memories of Michelle before the disappearance. Memories of conversations. Memories of ordinary moments that suddenly became precious. For investigators, unresolved cases remain open because the possibility of new information never disappears. A case that seems impossible today can change years later. New technology can reveal evidence that was previously unavailable. A witness can come forward. A forgotten detail can become important. A person who knew something may finally decide to speak. That possibility is what keeps many cold cases alive. Hope. Even when the trail becomes cold, the search does not completely stop. The disappearance of Michelle Bernstein Schultz became one of those cases where the greatest mystery was not only where she went. It was how someone could vanish while leaving behind almost no answers. A woman with a life. A woman with relationships. A woman with a home. A woman whose absence was immediately felt. Yet the explanation remained out of reach. The breakthrough that investigators needed never came. No dramatic discovery. No confession. No evidence that closed the case. Only questions. And sometimes, those are the hardest cases to accept. Because there is no clear ending. There is only waiting. Waiting for information. Waiting for a clue. Waiting for someone, somewhere, to reveal the missing piece. Michelle Bernstein Schultz's story remained unfinished. But unfinished does not mean forgotten. Her name continued to represent a question that still demanded an answer. What happened during those final hours? Where did Michelle go? And why did a woman's life disappear while all the evidence of that life remained behind? Until those questions are answered, the search continues. In many true crime stories, the final chapters arrive inside a courtroom. A suspect sits before a judge. Evidence is presented. Witnesses tell their stories. A verdict is announced. For families who have spent months or years searching for answers, the courtroom can become the place where the truth finally receives a name. It can bring accountability. It can bring justice. It can bring a sense that the world has acknowledged what happened. But for Michelle Bernstein Schultz's family, that moment never came. There was no trial. No jury. No prosecutor standing before a courtroom explaining what happened. No final decision that could answer the questions surrounding her disappearance. Instead, Michelle's case remained suspended in uncertainty. A missing person case without a confirmed ending. A story without a final chapter. And for the people who loved her, that absence of justice created a different kind of pain. Because when someone disappears, the family does not only lose the person. They lose certainty. They lose the ability to understand what happened. They lose the simple answers that most people take for granted. Where is she? Why did this happen? Who knows the truth? Those questions can follow a family every single day. The disappearance of Michelle Bernstein Schultz never reached the stage where a courtroom could examine the evidence. There was no public trial where every detail was placed under examination. No moment when all sides presented their arguments. No sentence handed down. And without those things, the family was left with something much more difficult. Waiting. The justice system depends on evidence. Investigators need facts that can be proven. Prosecutors need information strong enough to present in court. A suspicion, even a powerful one, is not enough. A question is not enough. A theory is not enough. There must be evidence. And in Michelle's case, the publicly known information did not produce the kind of evidence needed for criminal charges. This does not mean the questions disappeared. It does not mean the family stopped searching. It simply meant that the investigation remained unresolved. For Michelle's loved ones, the lack of a courtroom did not mean the end of the fight. It meant the fight continued. They continued wanting answers. They continued hoping someone would provide information. They continued believing that Michelle's story deserved to be completed. One of the most painful realities in unresolved disappearances is that families often live between two worlds. To some people, the case may slowly become old news. The public moves on. The media attention fades. People become distracted by other events. But for the family, time does not erase the disappearance. The missing person is still missing. The unanswered questions are still unanswered. The pain does not follow the same calendar as the rest of the world. For Michelle's family, June 30, 2022, remained a date that changed everything. A day that divided life into before and after. Before Michelle disappeared. And after. The world continued moving. Phoenix continued growing. People continued their daily routines. But for those searching for Michelle, part of their lives remained frozen at the moment she vanished. The absence of a legal resolution also meant that many questions remained in the public conversation. People wondered what happened. They wondered whether someone knew more than they had revealed. They wondered whether the truth was hidden somewhere inside the unanswered details. But speculation cannot replace justice. The only thing that can truly bring justice is the discovery of facts. The discovery of evidence. The discovery of the truth. And that truth remained unknown. For investigators, unresolved cases are never easy. Every detective understands the responsibility behind a missing person case. Because behind every file number is a human being. A person who has a family. A person who has a history. A person whose life matters. The goal is not simply closing a case. The goal is finding answers. Finding the missing person. Providing the family with the truth they deserve. Michelle's disappearance represented the kind of case that stays with investigators because there is no simple conclusion. There is no final scene where everything becomes clear. Instead, there is only the continued search. The possibility that one new piece of information could change everything. A witness who remembers something. A person who decides to speak. A discovery that reveals what happened. That possibility is what keeps unresolved cases alive. Because cold cases are not truly forgotten. They wait. They wait for technology to improve. They wait for someone's conscience to change. They wait for one detail that was overlooked to become visible. Many investigations that appeared impossible for years have eventually found answers because someone, somewhere, provided the missing piece. That hope remains important in cases like Michelle's. Because the absence of a courtroom does not mean the absence of justice forever. Justice can arrive years later. Sometimes decades later. Sometimes after investigators and families have spent years searching through silence. The most important thing is that the search continues. For Michelle, justice is not only about finding someone responsible. It is also about finding the truth of what happened to her. Because the biggest unanswered question remains. Where is Michelle Bernstein Schultz? The answer to that question is the first step toward everything else. Toward understanding. Toward accountability. Toward peace. Until then, the case remains open in the hearts of those who knew her. A woman who had a life. A woman who had people who loved her. A woman whose disappearance created a wound that time could not simply heal. The world may not have reached a courtroom. There may not have been a verdict. But Michelle's story still demands attention. Because justice is not only about punishment. Sometimes justice begins with remembering. Remembering the person who disappeared. Remembering that someone is still searching. Remembering that behind every unanswered case is a human life waiting to be understood. And for Michelle Bernstein Schultz, the search for that understanding continues. The disappearance of Michelle Bernstein Schultz did not end on the day she vanished. For Michelle, that day represented a sudden interruption of her life. But for the people who loved her, it marked the beginning of a completely different existence. An existence filled with questions. An existence defined by waiting. An existence where every ordinary moment could become a reminder of the person who was no longer there. When someone dies, families experience grief through loss. When someone disappears, families experience grief through uncertainty. There is no final goodbye. No confirmation. No moment when the heart understands that the person is truly gone. Instead, there is a painful space between hope and fear. And that space can last for years. For Michelle's family, the aftermath was not about moving on. It was about learning how to live while still searching. The outside world often expects time to make things easier. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Months become years. people assume that eventually the pain becomes smaller. But for families of missing people, time does something different. It does not always heal the wound. Sometimes it simply makes the unanswered questions grow deeper. Every birthday becomes another reminder. Every holiday becomes another empty space. Every ordinary moment becomes connected to the thought, where is Michelle? The human mind struggles with uncertainty. It wants answers. It wants explanations. It wants a beginning, a middle, and an ending. But Michelle's story remained incomplete. There was no confirmed explanation of what happened after she disappeared. No final conversation that could provide comfort. No evidence that could bring certainty. Only memories and questions. For those who knew Michelle, remembering her became an important part of keeping her present. Because when a person disappears, there is a danger that the world begins to remember only the mystery. The missing person report. The investigation. The unanswered questions. But families remember something different. They remember the person before the disappearance. They remember the everyday moments. The conversations. The personality. The small habits that made Michelle unique. They remember the woman who existed before her name became connected to a case file. That is one of the most important parts of missing person cases. The person must never disappear twice. First, they disappear physically. Then, without continued attention, they risk disappearing from public memory. Michelle's family continued seeking answers because they believed her story mattered. They believed that someone, somewhere, might have information. A detail that had been forgotten. A memory that had been dismissed. A piece of evidence that had not yet been discovered. Many families of missing people live with the belief that answers can come at any time. A phone call years later. A new investigative development. A person finally deciding to tell the truth. That hope can be painful. But it can also be powerful. It keeps families searching. It keeps names alive. It keeps pressure on investigations that might otherwise fade away. The aftermath of Michelle's disappearance also affected how people viewed the circumstances surrounding the case. When someone disappears without explanation, people naturally search for patterns. They look at relationships. They look at timelines. They look at the people closest to the missing person. This is a normal part of understanding what happened. But unresolved cases often create another challenge. The difference between questions and conclusions. A question means something needs to be examined. A conclusion means something has been proven. In Michelle's case, questions remained. But there was no public evidence establishing a final answer. No confirmed explanation. No official resolution. That uncertainty is one of the hardest things for families to accept. Because without answers, there is no place to put the pain. There is no clear path forward. They cannot fully grieve. They cannot fully heal. They remain connected to the possibility that one day, Michelle may be found. For investigators, the aftermath of an unresolved disappearance is also difficult. Cases can remain open for years. Files continue to exist. Information can be revisited. New technology can change what investigators are able to discover. A case that seems impossible at one point can look different years later. Time can sometimes work against an investigation. But sometimes, time also creates opportunities. People change. Circumstances change. New information emerges. The truth has a way of remaining possible, even when it feels distant. For Michelle's case, the absence of a resolution became the defining feature. There was no dramatic conclusion. No moment where the mystery disappeared. Instead, there was simply the continuation of a search. A search for a woman whose life mattered. A search for answers that could finally explain what happened. The city of Phoenix continued moving forward. New buildings appeared. New residents arrived. People lived their everyday lives beneath the same desert sun. But somewhere within that same city remained an unanswered question. A woman had disappeared. And someone knew something. That belief is what keeps many families going. The belief that the truth exists somewhere. That the missing piece is not gone forever. That one day, the silence will finally be broken. Michelle Bernstein Schultz became more than a missing person case. She became a reminder of the thousands of families across the world who live with unanswered disappearances. Families who wake up every morning wondering. Families who continue searching. Families who refuse to let their loved ones become forgotten. Because every missing person represents more than an investigation. They represent a life. A story. A person who mattered. Michelle's story is not defined only by the day she vanished. It is also defined by the life she lived before that moment. By the people who loved her. By the memories that remain. By the search for answers that continues. The greatest tragedy of an unresolved disappearance is not only the absence of the person. It is the absence of certainty. The inability to know. The inability to understand. The inability to close the final chapter. And that is where Michelle's family remains. Waiting. Searching. Hoping. Because somewhere beyond the unanswered questions and the years of silence is the truth. And until that truth is found, Michelle Bernstein Schultz's story remains unfinished. When a person disappears without explanation, the human mind naturally searches for answers. People want to understand what happened. They want to find a reason behind something that feels impossible. A person was there one moment. Then they were gone. And the space between those two moments becomes filled with questions. For Michelle Bernstein Schultz's disappearance, that space became a place where theories developed, concerns grew, and unanswered questions continued to surround the case. But theories are not the same as facts. Questions are not the same as answers. And in a case where the truth remains unknown, separating what is confirmed from what is suspected becomes one of the most important parts of understanding the story. The disappearance of Michelle created many questions because the circumstances were unusual. The things left behind. The lack of a clear explanation. The absence of confirmed evidence showing where she went. All of these details created uncertainty. And uncertainty often leads people to search for possible explanations. One of the first possibilities considered in any missing person case is whether the person left voluntarily. People disappear for many different reasons. Some leave because they want to start a new life. Some leave because they are facing personal struggles. Some leave because they want distance from their previous circumstances. Investigators must always consider this possibility. But they must also compare it with the evidence. In Michelle's case, those who knew her questioned whether voluntary disappearance matched the circumstances. They pointed to the belongings she left behind. Her phone. Her wallet. Her vehicle. Her dog. The items connected to her everyday life remained. To her family, those details suggested that Michelle had not carefully planned to leave. They believed something unexpected had happened. But without direct evidence, investigators could not publicly confirm exactly what occurred. This uncertainty became the central challenge of the case. Another major area of attention involved the people closest to Michelle. In many missing person investigations, investigators begin with those who had the most recent contact with the missing person. This is not because they are automatically considered responsible. It is because the final known interactions often hold the most important information. Who was there? What was said? What happened during those final hours? What changed? Michelle's boyfriend became part of the public discussion because he was one of the last known people connected to her before her disappearance. His account of events became an important part of reconstructing the timeline. According to information shared by Michelle's family, he stated that Michelle was not feeling well before she disappeared and that he slept in the living room so he would not disturb her. For investigators, statements like this must be carefully examined. A statement can provide information. It can establish a timeline. It can explain certain actions. But it must always be compared with other evidence. The goal of an investigation is not to follow assumptions. The goal is to discover facts. And in Michelle's case, publicly available information did not provide a confirmed explanation of what happened. The lack of a resolution created a difficult environment. Without answers, people often return again and again to the same questions. What happened inside the apartment? Did Michelle leave on her own? Did someone else play a role? Was there a moment that investigators missed? These questions remained because the case lacked the evidence needed to provide certainty. One of the most frustrating aspects of unresolved disappearances is that sometimes the truth may exist, but it remains hidden. Someone may know something. Someone may have seen something. Someone may hold a piece of information that appears insignificant but could completely change the investigation. That possibility is what keeps investigators and families searching. Because cases can change. A person who once refused to speak may eventually come forward. New technology may reveal information that was impossible to find years earlier. A forgotten detail may become meaningful. A cold case is never truly frozen. It is simply waiting for something new. The public attention surrounding Michelle's disappearance also reflected a larger reality about missing person cases. When someone disappears, communities often become involved. People share information. They spread awareness. They search for answers. They want to believe that someone missing can still be found. But public attention also creates challenges. As theories spread, it becomes harder to separate verified information from speculation. A mystery can become filled with assumptions. People may create their own explanations. They may believe they understand what happened. But without evidence, those conclusions remain uncertain. For Michelle's family, the most important thing was not proving a theory. It was finding the truth. They did not want rumors. They wanted answers. They wanted to know where Michelle was. They wanted to know why she disappeared. They wanted the world to remember that behind every investigation was a real person. A woman with a life. A woman with memories. A woman who had people waiting for her return. The emotional weight of Michelle's disappearance came from the fact that there was no final moment. No confirmed ending. No explanation that allowed her loved ones to understand what happened. Instead, they remained trapped in the most painful part of any mystery. The unknown. The unknown creates endless possibilities. It allows hope to survive. But it also allows fear to survive. Every possibility exists because nothing has been proven. That is what makes unresolved cases so difficult. The absence of an answer does not mean nothing happened. It means the truth has not yet been discovered. Michelle's disappearance remains a case defined by unanswered questions. A woman disappeared from a place where she should have been safe. Her belongings remained behind. Her family searched for answers. Investigators examined the available information. But the final explanation remained hidden. And somewhere within that hidden space between the last known moments and the present day lies the truth. The truth about what happened to Michelle Bernstein Schultz. The truth that her family continues to seek. The truth that could finally transform years of uncertainty into understanding. Until then, every question remains. Every possibility remains. And the search continues. Time changes many things. Cities grow. People move. Memories fade. The world continues forward, even when some families remain trapped in the same moment. For those searching for a missing loved one, time does not always bring closure. Sometimes, it only creates more questions. The disappearance of Michelle Bernstein Schultz became one of those cases where the passing years did not provide the answers everyone hoped for. Instead, the mystery remained. A woman was still missing. A family was still waiting. And investigators were still searching for the information that could explain what happened. In many investigations, time is considered an enemy. The longer a case remains unresolved, the more difficult it can become. People forget details. Evidence can become harder to locate. Witnesses may move away. Circumstances may change. But time can also create unexpected opportunities. Technology improves. Old evidence can be reviewed. New investigators can look at a case with fresh eyes. A person who once stayed silent may eventually decide to speak. That possibility is what keeps missing person investigations alive. Because every unresolved case carries one important truth. The absence of answers today does not mean answers will never come. For Michelle's family, keeping the search alive meant refusing to allow her name to disappear. A missing person case can become invisible over time. The first days may bring attention. The first weeks may bring searches and public interest. But as months and years pass, the number of people actively thinking about the case can decrease. For families, that can feel like losing their loved one again. The person is already missing. Then the world begins to move on. That is why awareness remains so important. Because every missing person deserves to be remembered. Michelle was not just a case file. She was not just a photograph on a missing person poster. She was a person who had a life before the investigation began. She had relationships. She had memories. She had people who cared about her. The investigation into her disappearance continued to face one of the biggest challenges in missing person cases, the lack of a clear explanation. There was no public evidence that revealed exactly what happened. No discovery that answered the most important questions. No confirmed timeline showing where Michelle went after she was last known to be at home. Without that information, investigators were forced to continue working through possibilities. Every missing person investigation requires patience. Detectives must examine information carefully because the smallest detail can sometimes become significant. A phone record. A forgotten conversation. A person's movement. A piece of information that seemed irrelevant years earlier. The difference between an unsolved case and a solved case can sometimes be a single detail. For Michelle's disappearance, investigators needed that detail. The one piece that could connect everything. The one piece that could explain the mystery. The one piece that could finally tell her family what happened. But until that piece was found, the case remained open. The emotional impact of an unresolved disappearance is difficult for people who have never experienced it to understand. There is a unique type of pain that comes from not knowing. When a person loses someone, grief often follows a path. There is sadness. There is acceptance. There is remembrance. But when someone disappears, the path becomes uncertain. Every possibility remains alive. The family may imagine a future where Michelle returns. They may imagine the moment they finally receive answers. But they may also fear the possibility that the truth is something they do not want to hear. That conflict can exist every single day. Hope and fear living together. The search for Michelle also raised larger questions about missing person cases across the country. How do families continue when there are no answers? How do investigators keep working when evidence is limited? How does society remember people whose stories have not been completed? These questions matter because Michelle's case is part of a much larger reality. Thousands of people disappear every year. Some are found quickly. Some are found years later. Some remain missing. Behind every number is a person. Behind every case is a family waiting. The work of investigators does not end simply because a case becomes difficult. A missing person remains missing until there is an answer. For Michelle, the search continued. The Phoenix Police Department and investigators handling missing person cases rely heavily on information, cooperation, and time. Sometimes the breakthrough does not come immediately. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places. A new witness. A new discovery. A new perspective. The passage of time does not erase the possibility of justice. Many cases throughout history have been solved after years of silence because someone finally provided the missing information. A person who once believed staying quiet was easier may change their mind. A secret that was hidden may eventually be revealed. A truth that seemed lost may finally come to light. That possibility remains one of the most important sources of hope for families. Because even after years pass, their loved one still matters. Their story still matters. Their questions still matter. Michelle Bernstein Schultz's disappearance remains a reminder that every missing person case represents more than an investigation. It represents a life interrupted. A family waiting. A story that deserves an ending. The world may continue moving forward. Phoenix may continue changing. New people may never know the name Michelle Bernstein Schultz. But for those searching for answers, she is not forgotten. She remains a daughter. A friend. A loved one. A person whose absence continues to be felt. And somewhere, hidden among the unanswered questions, there may still be the information needed to bring her story to a conclusion. The case remains open. The search remains active. And the hope remains the same. That one day, the silence will finally be broken. There is a particular kind of pain that comes with a disappearance. It is not the same as losing someone in a way that the world understands. There is no final goodbye. No last embrace knowing it will be the last. No moment where a family can gather, share memories, and say farewell. Instead, there is only uncertainty. A person is gone, but the story is not finished. A life has changed, but no one knows exactly why. For Michelle Bernstein Schultz's family, that uncertainty became the reality they had to live with every single day. The world often sees missing person cases through the lens of investigation. Evidence. Timelines. Suspects. Searches. Police reports. But behind every investigation is a human story. A family waking up every morning with the same unanswered question. Where is Michelle? That question does not disappear when the news cycle moves on. It does not disappear when the investigation becomes quieter. It does not disappear because time passes. For the people who love someone who has vanished, time does not provide the comfort it provides in other situations. Instead, every passing day creates another reminder. Another day without answers. Another day without knowing. Another day imagining every possible outcome. The emotional weight of a disappearance comes from living between two impossible realities. Hope says, maybe she is still alive. Fear says, maybe something terrible happened. Both possibilities exist at the same time. And that is what makes unresolved disappearances so painful. Families cannot fully move forward because they do not know what they are moving forward from. They cannot fully let go because there is still a possibility of finding their loved one. They cannot fully hold on because the silence becomes harder with every passing year. Michelle's disappearance created this emotional space for everyone who cared about her. A space where memories became both comforting and painful. Memories are often what keep missing people alive in the hearts of their families. The small things become important. The way someone laughed. The way they spoke. The habits that seemed ordinary at the time. The moments that no one realized would become precious memories. Before Michelle disappeared, she was simply living her life. She was not a mystery. She was not a case. She was a person. But after June 30, 2022, the world began viewing her through the question of what happened. The investigation became focused on the unknown. But her family continued seeing the person behind the mystery. That distinction matters. Because every missing person case has two stories. The story of what happened after the disappearance. And the story of the person who existed before it. Michelle's story before she vanished was filled with ordinary human experiences. Relationships. Daily routines. Personal moments. The things that make every person unique. Those memories are important because they remind people that Michelle was not defined by the day she disappeared. She was defined by the life she lived before that day. The aftermath of a disappearance can also affect families in ways that outsiders may never see. Simple decisions become difficult. Planning for the future becomes complicated. Even moments of happiness can feel strange because someone important is missing. A family celebration can have an empty place. A holiday can feel incomplete. A normal day can suddenly become emotional because something reminds them of the person they are searching for. And through all of it, there is always the question. What if? What if something had been done differently? What if someone had noticed something? What if the answer was closer than anyone realized? These thoughts are common among families of missing people. The human mind searches for control after something uncontrollable happens. It tries to find a moment where everything could have changed. But the truth is often more complicated. Sometimes people disappear in ways that no one could have predicted. Sometimes the answers remain hidden despite years of searching. For Michelle's family, the most important thing was continuing to look for those answers. They wanted people to remember her. They wanted information to come forward. They wanted the investigation to continue. Because every missing person deserves attention. Every family deserves answers. And every unanswered disappearance represents a person whose story has not reached its conclusion. The emotional impact of Michelle's case also shows why unresolved cases remain important long after the initial investigation. A missing person does not become less important because time passes. The questions do not become less meaningful. The family's need for answers does not become smaller. In many ways, time makes the need for answers even stronger. Because every year represents another year without knowing. Another year without closure. Another year wondering what happened. For investigators, these cases require patience and determination. A cold case is not a forgotten case. It is a case waiting for the right information. A case waiting for the right person to speak. A case waiting for the evidence that finally reveals the truth. Technology continues to change the way investigators approach unresolved cases. New methods can sometimes reveal information that was impossible to discover years earlier. Old evidence can be reviewed. New connections can be made. A case that once seemed impossible can suddenly move forward. That possibility gives families a reason to continue hoping. Because the story is not over until the truth is known. Michelle's disappearance remains a reminder of how fragile ordinary life can be. One day, someone can be living a normal routine. The next day, their absence becomes the center of an investigation. A family's entire world can change because of one unanswered question. Where did they go? Why did they disappear? What happened? These questions are simple to ask. But for families, they can become lifelong burdens. The mystery surrounding Michelle Bernstein Schultz is not only about the circumstances of her disappearance. It is about the people left behind. The people who continue searching. The people who continue remembering. The people who refuse to let her story disappear. Because even without answers, Michelle's life still has meaning. Her name still matters. Her story still matters. And as long as people continue asking what happened, there remains a possibility that one day, someone will finally provide the answer. The silence surrounding Michelle's disappearance may be long. But silence is not the same as the end. Sometimes, the truth is simply waiting for the moment when it can finally be heard. In every unresolved disappearance, there comes a point where the investigation becomes more than a search for evidence. It becomes a search for meaning. Investigators search for facts. Families search for hope. The public searches for understanding. But all of them are looking toward the same thing. The truth. For Michelle Bernstein Schultz, the truth remained hidden. The questions surrounding her disappearance continued to exist because the most important piece of the story was still missing. What happened after the last known moments of her life? What happened inside the Phoenix apartment? Where did Michelle go? And who, if anyone, knew the answer? These questions remained at the center of the case. The investigation had examined the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, but the information publicly available did not provide a final explanation. There was no confirmed discovery that solved the mystery. No evidence that revealed a complete timeline. No moment where investigators could tell Michelle's family exactly what happened. Instead, the case remained built around fragments. Pieces of information. Small details. Unanswered possibilities. In missing person investigations, those fragments can be both frustrating and valuable. A single detail can seem insignificant until it connects with another piece years later. A conversation that seemed ordinary. A movement that seemed meaningless. A decision that seemed normal. Sometimes, the smallest details become the most important. That is why investigators continue reviewing cases even after years have passed. Because time does not always erase the truth. Sometimes, time reveals it. The disappearance of Michelle Bernstein Schultz carried many of the characteristics that make missing person cases especially difficult. There was no clear trail showing where she went. There was no confirmed reason for her disappearance. There was no public evidence that established exactly what happened. The investigation existed in a difficult space where many questions remained possible. Was Michelle's disappearance connected to something happening in her personal life? Was there a hidden problem that others did not know about? Was someone else involved? Or was there another explanation that investigators had not yet uncovered? Every possibility required examination. But every possibility also required evidence. That is the challenge of solving a disappearance. The truth may feel close. The circumstances may appear suspicious. The questions may seem obvious. But without proof, investigators cannot move from possibility to certainty. For Michelle's family, however, the emotional reality was different. They did not need theories. They needed answers. They needed to know where Michelle was. They needed to know whether she was safe. They needed to know what happened during those final hours. A family does not experience a disappearance as an investigation. They experience it as a missing piece of their own life. Every day without answers creates another reminder that something is unfinished. The search for Michelle also highlights one of the most difficult realities of missing person cases. The longer someone is missing, the more the world changes around them. People who knew them continue living. Neighborhoods change. Technology changes. Memories become less clear. But the missing person remains connected to the moment they disappeared. For Michelle, the unanswered questions remained connected to that summer day in 2022. The city around her continued moving. But the mystery remained. A woman had disappeared from a place where she should have been safe. A woman whose personal belongings remained behind. A woman whose family continued searching. A woman whose story still needed an ending. One of the greatest challenges in unresolved cases is maintaining attention. Without continued awareness, cases can fade from public memory. That is why families often continue sharing information. They continue speaking about their loved ones. They continue hoping that someone with knowledge will come forward. Sometimes the person who has the answer is not a stranger. Sometimes it is someone who has carried a secret. Sometimes it is someone who saw something but did not realize its importance. Sometimes it is someone who remained silent because they were afraid. The possibility that someone knows more is one of the reasons families continue searching. Because every unanswered case contains the possibility that the truth is still somewhere nearby. The search for Michelle was not only about finding a missing woman. It was about restoring the story of someone whose life had been interrupted. A person cannot be reduced to the circumstances of their disappearance. Michelle was not only the woman who vanished. She was a person with a history. A person with relationships. A person whose absence affected real people. That is why unresolved cases continue to matter. Because behind every mystery is someone who deserves to be found. Someone who deserves justice. Someone who deserves to have their story completed. As investigators and families continue searching, one question remains more important than all others. What happened to Michelle Bernstein Schultz? The answer may exist in evidence that has not yet been discovered. It may exist in information that has not yet been shared. It may exist in a memory someone has not yet connected to the case. But until that answer arrives, the search continues. The case remains open. The questions remain. And Michelle's name remains connected to the hope that one day the truth will finally come forward. Because every missing person deserves more than a file number. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be searched for. They deserve the chance for their story to be completed. Michelle Bernstein Schultz's disappearance remains a mystery. But mysteries are not solved because people stop looking. They are solved because someone keeps searching. And for Michelle, that search continues.